Hi again then guys, and welcome to the very last review, of course, of the whole batch of 9 vehicles, I believe it was, from the latest selection, the 1.29 patch, which funnily enough is already outdated by the time we've got around to this final car, because we're on 1.3 already, the smaller update, and we are eagerly anticipating the 1.31 patch early next month for stuff like the Ferrari F50, McLaren P1 GTR, and of course a number of others which we don't even know yet, and it's looking to be a very, very cool update. Now, in terms of this car, the reason why I left it until last is fairly obvious. It's not that it's a bad car, it's just that I always tend to focus on the absolute fan favourites first, as you would, from a marketing point of view, let's say, running your channel as a business. I focus on the spicy stuff, like the Super GTs and the Zonda Rs and that kind of thing, as we will with the new pack and as we have with every other pack. But the fact that I leave these particular cars like the Mini, or I believe before I left the Honda S660 until last or something like that in that particular month, it's not that it's a bad car, because if you recall, that Honda was brilliant. It's one of the best, if not the best, N100 cars around in terms of its all-round ability. So I'm not saying that this is a bad car by leaving it until last. I just figured that the other ones are kind of more important on most people's minds. Now, the first thing that intrigues me about this Mini is the choice of which Mini they brought back, because for those who maybe didn't use all of the Minis, I did review all of them in GT6, the premiums and the non-premiums, from the Mini 1 in the early 2000s all the way up to the 2007 Cooper S, I think it was, and everything in between. And that's the thing that intrigues me, because you would assume if they're going to bring back a premium new Mini, you'd think they'd go for the newest one, because there is a 2007 premium. This one, in Gran Turismo 6, if I recall correctly, was also a premium car, and yet it's older. So why they chose this one is alien to me. It's not the obvious choice to go for, but it is the kind of original new Mini, if that makes sense, like the new Beetle, the earliest of the early 2000s rejuvenation of the Mini name. And look where we are now with all of the different Mini models, they're going strong. So in many ways you could argue that this is a very important one, and perhaps more iconic, for instance, than the 2007. So that might be the reasoning that they used. So with that in mind, with any Mini, be it the Mini 1 all the way up to the John Cooper GP, there are certain things that you expect of it. Of course, front-wheel drive, to be compact, probably very good through corners, to have great driving manners, to be cute to some degree, and to have a relatively modest amount of power if you compare it to most of its rivals, and yet, and this is the good thing, to have actually very respectable performance from said power. For instance, a Mini like this, as an example, you got the 1.6 supercharged engine with only 167 horsepower. That doesn't sound that amazing. Even back in the early 2000s, there were plenty of other hot hatches with way more. The Ford Focus RS, the Golf R32 of a similar time, way more power, like 80 horsepower more even back then. So the thing about Minis is it almost feels like they don't need more power. Some of them do, but this one, for instance, it's still a perfectly capable hot hatch that can take on a lot of those other ones around the track anyway. So that's a good start. It means that you've got something good to work with straight off the bat, but at the same time, don't go into driving this Mini and owning this Mini expecting it to be everything that the classic one is, because that it is not. In some ways, it's superior to the classic, and in others, it definitely isn't. Now, the ways that you would think it would be better are pretty obvious, and you'd be correct in thinking it's faster in a straight line, because it is. It's a more powerful car, there's a lot more torque, it's a faster vehicle. The downside is also the exact one that you'd assume. It's not quite as nimble through corners because it's not as small, and crucially, it's not as light. And that brings me to the only specific downside of this car. Unfortunately, for something with Mini as its name, and with kind of the idea of being small and nimble as the whole point of the design, it's actually not that lightweight. And that's unfortunate for a front-engine, front-wheel drive car, because it's not like you can use the excuse of, oh, it's got rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive to make it that little bit heavier. Well, no, it doesn't have any of that. It's just a hatchback with front-wheel drive, but it still manages to weigh about the same as something like a TVR or a Noble. So in comparison, that doesn't sound that great. 1180 kilos is quite a bit, and even when you drop it, it's still 1050, so that's still a fair bit over a metric ton. Now consequently, the horsepower per ton is only 142. And even for a hot hatch, that doesn't sound that great. When you tune it up, you can increase the power, you can drop the weight, but even then, it's not amazing. What about how it performs though? Because as I said just now, often minis will go beyond the raw numbers. The Classic with its 63 horsepower, these newer ones with 160 horsepower. So can it do that? Can it pull through the numbers despite what appears to be a downside to be really good? Well, yes and no. Because I would say that this is undoubtedly the most forgiving and the most beginner-friendly car of the entire 1.29 selection. Not just because it's slower than the others, but because it's just flat-out easy to drive. You don't even need to tune it at all, it's already good, straight off the bat, because at the end of the day, it is a ready-to-go hot hatch from Mini. This isn't some bog-standard model. However, its ability has limits which you reach very quickly. For instance, earlier today we did the tune setup for it in N100, we took it around a relatively short track at Dragon Trail, and yet it barely could keep up with the kind of lap times that we were getting from stuff like the Honda Beat. So that doesn't sound quite as good, considering that the Honda Beat, the Daihatsu Copen, they're still no way near as quick as something like the Honda S660 for instance. Even the Classic Mini was a lot quicker. I believe if I recall correctly, my Classic Mini did something like a 205 lap compared to a 209 for this one, and those are both in N100. So that's a huge difference. Around a track that only takes, 2 minutes or just over, to be that much quicker is a huge deal. So don't buy this Mini if you're looking to dominate racing in any category. But at the same time, and this is the funny thing, it actually is a really fast little car. And it's kind of a contradictory feeling, almost. The car feels, unfortunately, faster than it actually is. Because when you drive some N100 cars, like for instance, for me the Honda S660 doesn't feel that impressive. But it's a lot faster than it feels. With this Mini, it's the exact opposite. It feels quick and nimble and fun and focused. And then you look at the lap time and you think, wait, what happened? Because for some strange reason, it's way slower than everything else, like 4 or 5 seconds off the pace. So why is that? Well, it's because of the BMW DNA. That's why it feels so good. They make good drivers' cars, but at the same time, it does struggle, and it struggles in 2 ways. One, it struggles in a straight line because you're reducing the power so much to get it down to N100, and of course, if you have it in N200 or up in N300, that's going to be less of an issue, but more so it's the weight. Because with something like this Mini, again, take the Classic as an example, if it doesn't have the straight line power, as the old one simply doesn't, you must make up for that with cornering ability for it to have any kind of chance. And if something is bad through corners, it must be good on the straights to have any kind of chance. It has to have one or the other to even be worth using. Or both, of course. Unfortunately for this Mini, it doesn't have enough of either to be a dominant force. It's not quick enough on the straights, and it's not quick enough through the corners. It's good on the straights, but not great, and it's fun through the corners, but not the fastest. That's unfortunate, because it means that to some degree, as great as this car is in its own little way, and it is very fun, it just doesn't feel that necessary or that useful in racing. So you can use it, it's great for one-make racing, great for career mode, and under certain conditions you can win with it online, but generally speaking, it's not the car that I would recommend as a go-to, and that's kind of a shame, because it's a lot of fun. So if nothing else, I'd recommend just buying it and trying it out purely for the fun of it. But that's it overall for this review. Of course, I will see you guys next time, tomorrow in fact, for a special video also related to the 1.29 update, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.